here I am joined. I don't know what on earth took me so long to bring Michael onto my channel. A lot of people may be thinking, why do you take so long? I mean, we've done so much work together that at times I forget I need to bring him onto my channel. And I'm glad to finally have you here, Mike. I'm glad to have you here talking about an area where I guess I'd probably be exaggerating in the sense of, actually, I wouldn't be exaggerating. I'd be right on point if I said, this is your bread and butter. I'd be right on point. It really is your bread and butter. I've seen you do a lot of work on the Magisterium, an area where I don't think that you are good, and I think you are of the elite level. You do an incredible work in that field, and that's why particularly I'm thrilled to have you here. But before we even dive in, brother, how have you been?
Been doing good. You know, I'm on the upswing right now. I was sick, you know, earlier this week and a little bit last week, but like I said, I'm on the upswing, so getting better.
That's really good. I gotta say, man, how often do you clean those cardboard books back there?
Unfortunately, this place tends to get a little dusty, so I actually have to do it fairly frequently.
They look real. You must clean them often.
I read them often too.
You read them often as well. I can confirm to the audience, I've been there physically. God willing, we'll be back there again in the future, and they are real. Yep. They are 100% real, and they have been used. They've been read. So
they got notes all in them. So
yeah, that's that's really that's the fun thing. I like.
Here's what's funny though, is I'll actually go through and, you know, like the church father said over here, I'll go through and read something and I'll see my notes and I'm thinking, I don't even remember reading this.
Yeah. Really incredible. There's a lot of gems every time we go over them again, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's good stuff.
A lot of really great stuff there. Mm-hmm. Now today, one particular area that I hear a lot about is the Magisterium, and a lot of really misinformation out there, probably much more than a lot of other areas. And I said, you know what, let me bring Michael on. This is an area where he really knows his stuff, has done a ton of work in. And well, to really get the ball rolling, when we talk about a magisterial reversal, what does that mean? And how could that happen if the church is indefectible, if on faith and on matters of faith and morals, the church cannot proclaim something from the chair that would be incorrect? What's going on there? What are we talking about when we talk about a magisterial reversal?
Yeah, and in order to really situate this, I'll just briefly go over the Magisterium, its organs and things like that, and that will then situate the discussion for magisterial reversals, because I think that could easily be misunderstood unless I make some general qualifications. So, if it's okay with you, I'll go over that first.
For sure.
So, I mean, when we talk about the Magisterium, it's just a fancy word that usually just indicates teaching authority. And it's in reference to the Pope and the College of Bishops. So we can speak of the Magisterium in three ways: as subject, as object, and as act. And I actually like the way Dr. John Joy in his dissertation kind of outlines the subject, object, act distinction here within the Magisterium. So I'm just gonna kind of use his work as an outline. So shout out to Dr. Joy and his research there. But I mean, when we speak of the Magisterium as subject, here we're talking about the Pope and the College of Bishops. So when we speak of the Pope, we're specifically talking about, at least in this context, when he teaches as the universal shepherd, as the shepherd of all Christian faithful, not necessarily as a local bishop, although we can speak of his magisterium as the local bishop of Rome. But I tend to have these discussions in the context of his universal magisterium. So when we at least speak of a universal organ of the magisterium as a subject, we're talking about the Pope when he's teaching all of the faithful. So there's, of course, the Pope. We're pretty familiar with the Pope, you know, as Catholics, as a teaching subject. Now, another one obviously is going to be the College of Bishops. We often hear about the College of Bishops whenever they're gathered in ecumenical councils. That's pretty common. We tend to hear about that, but what we don't hear a lot about when it comes to the subject of the Magisterium is the College of Bishops when it's dispersed throughout the world. It can also teach when the bishops are not gathered in an ecumenical council. It can still teach as this universal teaching authority, universal organ. And it's when the bishops are dispersed throughout the world, but they're in union with the Pope. They're, whenever they constantly and consistently teach something as definitive, we would say that that's also something that's infallible. So we can speak of the College of Bishops in those two ways, in a council or dispersed throughout the world. Sometimes that's called the ordinary and universal magisterium.
Right.
Back in the day, in like 1800s, sometimes they would just use the word ordinary magisterium to refer to that. But we tend to speak of it now as the ordinary and universal, because sometimes ordinary magisterium can just be used to talk about the Pope. And so to avoid confusion, we just say ordinary and universal to refer to this phenomenon. So that's the magisterium as subject in a nutshell. Then we can talk about the magisterium as object, what it teaches. Obviously, it's teaching on matters of faith and morals. When we talk about the Pope maybe commenting on a matter of science or something, that's not part of his magisterium.
Correct.
We're talking specifically whenever the magisterium teaches on matters of faith and morals, and it can do so in multiple ways. But we can also talk about two different objects here. We can talk about things that the Bishop of Rome, perhaps the Pope or an ecumenical council, teaches on things that are divinely related matters, on matters that relate to divine revelation. So what is revealed by God in sacred scripture, we can speak of them teaching on those things. They can also teach on things of faith and morals that are related to something that God has revealed. Let me give you an example of the difference between the two. Divinely revealed matter, I would say Jesus being fully God, fully man. I think that's there in sacred scripture.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so clearly the Council of Nicaea thought so as well. So I'm in good company there. But that's something that's divinely revealed. But then if we were to ask the question, like, okay, well, could Jesus have laughed? Well, sacred scripture doesn't directly answer that, but in a way it kind of does, because there's something that relates to what scripture says, and that is scripture says that Jesus is fully human, and we would say this ability to laugh, risibility, is part of humanity. So if Jesus was fully human, he at least had the ability to laugh. So even though scripture itself doesn't say he laughed or had the ability to laugh, we know he did, because scripture does say, however, that he's fully human, and we know by reason one of the things that humanity brings is risibility. So another example might be is the Council of Nicaea I, truly an ecumenical council, like God nowhere revealed in divine revelation. Nicaea I is, an ecumenical council. God did not reveal that to the apostles, but it's necessary to preserve that in order to preserve what has been revealed by God, and that is the teaching of Nicaea. So we might speak of the difference between what's called a primary object of infallibility and a secondary object. Primary object is something that the church maybe infallibly teaches that is in the Word of God. And then a secondary object is just something that's related to it, and it's necessary to preserve in order to preserve something that is in the Word of God. And the church can teach that infallibly. So those are the objects of the church's teachings. And then we can speak about act, the magisterium as act. Here we can use the distinction between the magisterium when it defines something and the magisterium when it teaches something. When we speak about defining something, we're talking about we tend to call the extraordinary magisterium. These are those solemn definitions, professions of faith put forward by maybe an ecumenical council or something ex cathedra, the Immaculate Conception, or the Assumption of the Virgin Mary and Munificentissimus Deus by Pius XII. We would say that those have solemn definitions in them. That's what we mean by whenever we speak of the church defining something. It's a solemn act. It's very specific. It's done in the extraordinary magisterium. But then we can also talk about the church teaching, which is not necessarily the same as defining. This is more what people tend to call the ordinary magisterium. Now, it's important, however, to note that the church can teach something definitively or non-definitively. And what this means is the church can teach something as infallible, or the church can teach something as not necessarily infallible whenever it teaches it. It can say, I'm teaching this authoritatively at the moment, but it's not my last word on it.
Right.
So the vast majority of things that fall under a papal encyclical, for example, would fall in this category. The Pope is teaching it authentically in his magisterium, and it's authoritatively. That's what we mean by the word authentically. But it's not necessarily the last word on the subject. It's not ex cathedra. So we can speak of this concept of non-definitive teachings. So now that we have that, that perspective of what we're talking about whenever we speak about the magisterium, I can now get into answering your question. What is a reversal? First of all, a reversal would be, I would phrase it as an undoing of a proposition or a teaching, an undoing of a teaching or a proposition that was previously taught authoritatively. So it was authoritatively taught, but it has been reversed. It has been undone, and the opposite is being taught. And I'm saying here, like, substantially the opposite is being taught. Not just some accidental change, not just the way the language is tweaked and phrased, but like the concept, the proposition has been overturned and undone. So like a full, substantial propositional reversal. Now, what can be reversed? That's the question. Obviously, infallible teachings can't be reversed. So anything that is definitively taught, solemnly defined, no, those things can't be reversed. We're not saying that, Nicaea's teaching on Jesus being consubstantial with the Father can be undone, or the Immaculate Conception. Those are infallibly taught things, and so we can't say that is what we're talking about when we speak of magisterial reversals. We're talking only about things that were taught authoritatively but non-definitively.
Yeah.
So non-definitive teachings. And notice I said teachings because I'm not talking about discipline. Some people will point me to examples of reversals and they're pointing me to a discipline. And I'm thinking, when we speak about a magisterial reversal, we're not talking about disciplinary reversals. We're not talking about that. We're talking about specifically a teaching reversal. So I'm not talking about disciplines here, just teachings and non-definitive teachings. That's what a reversal is. What's maybe some evidence for it? It's implied. It's implied in what the church has taught about non-definitive teachings. So, for example, you have Lumen Gentium 25 by the Second Vatican Council, this 25th paragraph. It talks about the ministry of the Pope, and he has the ability to teach something ex cathedra, something definitively and solemnly. Now, he has that, but it also then speaks about whenever he's teaching authentically, but not ex cathedra and not infallibly. Well, it's talking about that authentic magisterium that is non-definitive. It's not the final word. It's authoritative, but it's not the final word on the matter. So Lumen Gentium itself recognizes this concept of non-definitive teachings. And as soon as you mention the concept of non-definitive teachings, that carries with it certain connotations.
Yeah.
If it's non-definitive, by definition, it can be overturned. Right? Because if it were definitive, obviously you couldn't overturn it. But if it's not definitive, by the very nature of being not definitive, it could be reversed. So I want to say it's already there implicitly in the concept of non-definitive teachings, or what we call merely authentic teachings of the magisterium. It's already there implicitly. Now, you can also see in the profession of faith that John Paul II put forward in 1989. He put forward a profession of faith for us as Catholics to maintain. And, in the profession of faith, he gives us the Nicene Creed, the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed that we say during the liturgy. And so you make a profession of faith in that, and then he adds 3 paragraphs. He talks about things that we're to accept and give divine and Catholic faith to that are dogmatic, those primary objects that I spoke about earlier, those things that are found in the Word of God. He then also speaks about how we're to give a definitive assent to teachings that are definitively taught by the church, but they're not exactly revealed by God. They're that secondary object of infallibility that we spoke of. And then he gives us a 3rd paragraph. And in the 3rd paragraph, he speaks about things that are taught authoritatively but non-definitively. So there you have, even in our profession of faith, in this third paragraph category, this acknowledgement that there could be teachings that are authoritative but reversible because they're non-definitive.
Yeah.
So again, it's implicit there in the profession of faith as well. So that's kind of the ground for where this comes from. Now, the question now is, has there ever been any magisterial reversals? Because obviously the answer is going to be yes, there could be a magisterial reversal, because we already established if you have something non-definitive, you could overturn it because it is non-definitive. So could there be a magisterial reversal? Yes. Has there ever been one? That is the debatable topic. And that's the topic that, frankly, a ton of our discussions today, especially in apologetic circles, revolves around. Has the church changed its teaching on outside the church there is no salvation? Has it reversed that? Has the church reversed its teaching on religious liberty or the death penalty? Has it changed its teaching? Believe it or not, there's one that doesn't come up enough, but it's starting to come up now a little bit more. But it was certainly debated at the Second Vatican Council, and that is, where does the local bishop get their jurisdiction from?
Right.
Is it directly through the sacrament of ordination, or is it from the Pope?
Yeah.
There's a question of, is there a magisterial reversal here? Because Pius XII taught that it was the jurisdiction came from the Pope, and Vatican II seems to indicate that it comes from the sacrament of ordination. Is that an example of a reversal, or is there a way to harmonize them? That's a debatable topic. So this is a question that is really pressing these days, because the topic of has the church changed in its teaching continues to come up the more and more I put on YouTube and watch videos.
and really, it by the very definition of the fact that we're not talking about definitive, such as the Immaculate Conception or what have you, a very healthy discussion can be had. I think a very healthy one. Let me toss one at you that I hear brought up very often. Love to get your opinion on it, because just the other day, I was asked by a Catholic and a non-Catholic, why did the church change her stance on the death penalty? What would your first off, has the church changed her stance on the death penalty? And if so, what's going on there?
Yeah, this is a good one, and this is one that's constantly coming up. Now, I have done 2 videos in depth on this, but I'll give just a brief rundown of it. Number one, I wouldn't say that the teaching has changed. I wouldn't say the teaching has changed substantially. So I wouldn't categorize this as a reversal, magisterial reversal, but I do think that there is a disciplinary aspect that has changed here. So we might refer to this as a disciplinary reversal or prudential judgment that has been overturned or something along those lines. But I would not categorize it as a magisterial reversal. But people are going to ask, well, how is it? It seems like the church has changed its teaching. So here's the deal. The church's teaching on the death penalty hasn't changed, but there actually has been an accidental change. That is not a substantial change, not a full reversal to a teaching, but there has been a greater appreciation to the teaching of the dignity of the human person. There is that. We do have a greater awareness of the dignity of the human person, especially after World War II and the Holocaust and all the issues there. The bishops, especially at Vatican II, really highlighted this. And I think that we've become a little bit more appreciative of the dignity of the human person. That's not a change in our teaching on the dignity of the human person. It was always there. But do we have a greater appreciation, and are we highlighting it more? Yes. But that wouldn't be a full change, in our teaching. That would just kind of be an accidental highlighting. So there's a difference here in the doctrine, but it's not a substantial difference. It's just a highlighting of something. It's a greater appreciation. So there's that component that's related to this discussion on the death penalty. In light of the dignity of the human person, and then in light of the fact that we currently live in a society that has a penal system that can protect the safety of individuals without using the death penalty. The question now is, for retributive justice, is the death penalty necessary, or would it be not properly appreciating the dignity of the human person since there are alternatives to safeguard the human person, and we can give retributive justice in another way that is not lethal. That's the question. And so what Pope Francis is saying is it's inadmissible. He's not saying it's intrinsically evil, but he's saying the death penalty is inadmissible because he wants to say the penalty system is such that we can safeguard and protect individuals without the use of the death penalty, and we can also administer retributive justice without resorting to this, because if there's other alternatives for retributive justice, those should be considered sins. Death penalty should be the last resort in light of human dignity, and since it's not necessary and there's other alternatives, we should take those other alternatives, therefore it's inadmissible. Now, that's a prudential judgment on his part. That's not a teaching. That's a prudential decision in light of our circumstances. What you could do is say this: you know, Pope Francis, I'm not so sure that we live in that society, or I'm not so sure that every culture lives in that society. It seems that there might be some cultures that that's not the status of their penitential system. Maybe they can't preserve and safeguard the lives of individuals, and so they have to resort to this to protect individuals, and that is also what they resort to for retributive justice. So what we could do is question the prudence behind this discipline of Pope Francis. Perhaps Pope Francis is right. Perhaps he's wrong. But that's not a change to the teaching. It's a change to, in light of our current circumstances, how do we apply the teachings today? Sure. That's the question. So it wouldn't be a magisterial reversal. It'd just be a question of prudence and whether or not we agree with Pope Francis on that.
That's a very good point. And I think that people tend to, at times, overreact depending on what the media is putting out there. People can be affected a little bit, or at times a lot. I have had people tell me that this is a complete reversal of teaching because the early church was unanimous on this point. No, if you look at the early church fathers, no, they were not. You have a lot of early church fathers that opposed the death penalty from the 100s and on. It was opposed heavily in North Africa as well. So I think that what we need to do as Catholics, we need to become a little bit more familiar with our faith and not so rash to judgment. If there's one thing that I have noticed, Michael, and I've been guilty of it before in the past, is to rush to criticize the Holy Father. I'm going to give the Holy Father a little bit of the benefit of the doubt nowadays, but I think maybe we should give the Holy Father a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because by virtue of his very special, a divinely instituted office, I believe we are required to. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're required to, and I've had to kind of mitigate some of my perspectives here because I think in the past I've probably been a little bit too rash and haven't asked the question, is there a way that I could charitably interpret Pope Francis here? I'm required to do that due to the nature of his office. And it's really the same practice that we would give, for example, to sacred scripture. If we come across something in scripture that seems to conflict with another part of scripture, we don't automatically assume that it's a contradiction. You have to give it the judgment of charity and harmonize it. And so you have to do the same thing with our shepherds. At the end of the day, however, we do know that our shepherds could make mistakes. And so it's not the same as sacred scripture. There could be a failure here on part of the bishops or the Pope. But we really need to be morally certain before we would, before we would say that the Pope is wrong or the bishops are wrong. We would really need to have moral certitude and make sure we've done due diligence here in being charitable. So, I think the disposition has to be charitable, harmonize, do your best to reconcile rather than look for something like with rash judgment and evil suspicion. Just look for something that's in discontinuity and just immediately accuse. We have to do our best to avoid that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One thing that I hear very often does get brought up often, and you hear the argument usually being posited by our Eastern friends. It's one that seems to me to show a bit of an unfamiliarity with the Catholic faith. And that is the argument that you'll hear them say, well, look, you all can talk about the Magisterium day and night, but one heretical pope that you guys get and your whole system by virtue of Vatican I and papal infallibility, your whole system comes crumbling down upon you. Michael, I've got to be very clear. I hear it often. I'm going to hear it at least one time a week. What would you say to that? And is there anything to that?
So this is a complex question, because when we talk about a heretical pope, in what sense are we referring to? Because are we just saying a pope who maintains heresy privately? I think that we recognize that a pope could maintain heresy privately, and that wouldn't invalidate his teaching office. So obviously we can't be referring to that. Can the pope as a private individual hold to a heresy and still the claims about the Catholic magisterium and the papacy still are true? Yes, because the claims that we've made are in relation to his teaching office, not necessarily to his personal holiness and piety.
And let me interrupt briefly to make one comment. Great answer, by the way. The only reason I'm interrupting briefly is to say I don't think they are able to draw that distinction. I think that is the problem, Michael, that they're unable to draw that distinction, that they will then equate, okay, well, a heretical pope automatically papal infallibility goes out the window, even if he's privately heretical. I don't think they're able to understand that kind of a distinction.
Some people aren't making that distinction, and so that's why I bring it out, because it's important to point out we're talking about infallibility and the teaching office, and then we have to further distinguish here. When we speak about infallibility in the teaching office, we're talking about whenever he teaches, obviously, infallibly. So the Pope could not teach heresy infallibly. He could not definitively bind the church to heresy. If he were to teach heresy ex cathedra, that would invalidate Vatican I, and we should all go home and stop being Catholics, because Catholicism has been disproven at that point. So we would say, no, a pope can't be heretical in his teaching office, in his definitive teachings. The question now is going to be, can the pope teach heresy non-definitively? That's where the debate is. And there's a couple ways that this can shake down. I'm going to go over both possibilities. Number one, I want to say that the Pope cannot teach heresy even non-definitively. And I want to say that based on certain things that are implied in Donum Veritatis, among other magisterial documents, and also in light of the preconciliar manualist concept of a safety that is found in the ordinary teachings of the Pope. So it effectively goes like this. You could have the Pope teaching something that could be reversed. That is, the teaching itself, the proposition itself could be untrue. So we already recognize that, because we already spoke of magisterial reversals. It could be that the Pope has taught something non-definitively that's not true. But the question is, could it be so untrue that it's heretical? That's the question, because not all untrue things are equal. There's some things that are not true, but they're not heretical. There's some things that are not true that are heretical. So when we say that the Pope could teach something that's not true non-definitively, could it be heretical? I want to say no, in light of certain things that speak about the safety of the Holy Spirit for the entire teaching office of the magisterium. How can we speak of the protection of the Holy Spirit for non-definitive teachings that could be reversed? It can't be a protection of the proposition itself. Otherwise, everything would be infallible. So it can't be that. So what could it be? It could only be this concept that it would be safe. It would be theologically safe. It wouldn't be something that if I were to assent to it, my soul would be damned. So the proposition itself might be untrue, but it wouldn't be something that was harmful to my soul if I assented to it. So I already say that the Pope cannot teach heresy even non-definitively. But let's say I'm wrong there. Let's say I'm misreading the magisterium here. Let's say these manuals are wrong. Let's just say that that's wrong. And that the Pope could teach heresy non-definitively. In that case, does that invalidate the Catholic claims? No, because ultimately the Catholic claims here has been that the Pope would be free from heresy in his definitive teachings. That's what Vatican I is guaranteed. It did not comment on could he teach heresy non-definitively. It did not deal with that. So even if you had a Pope who taught heresy non-definitively, it wouldn't invalidate Vatican I, and so it wouldn't destroy Catholicism. Now, that's, if the Pope were to just teach it. I, however, want to say, but if that heresy were to endure in the authentic magisterium for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in the Catholic Church, I want to say, well, that does start to touch on, essential issues related to the church. In other words, I don't think that the church could allow heresy, even in its non-definitive teachings, to endure for generation after generation after generation. I don't think that it could allow for such a thing. It would quickly stamp that out if that were even possible, which I don't think is possible.
Now, Michael, I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball at you, and the only reason I'm going to do it is because I hear it get brought up a lot. Well, Michael, what do we do with Pope Honorius? And you've heard it. Oh man, Michael, you probably heard it a million times. People will. Let me let people know first off. The debate surrounding Pope Honorius will be. You'll hear the claim that Pope Honorius was definitely a manifest heretic. The church condemned him as a heretic, and thus that really does invalidate the claims of Vatican I, as if the church at Vatican I had no idea about the case of Pope Honorius, right? The church was clueless to Honorius, right? So let me ask you first off, was Pope Honorius a heretic?
Yeah, this is a complex question here. So hear me out here, because there's two main issues that we have to really contend with here. Did he actually say something heretical, in his letters? When you look at them, it seems that he did not. It seems that he did not intend to teach monothelitism. He does use the term one will, but it seems that he did not mean by that monothelitism. It seems that he meant that Christ's human will and divine will are one. They're united. They're together. It's not that they're in conflict with each other. So it doesn't seem that he taught monothelitism. That's also how people who were close to him and his successor understood him. John IV wrote an apology for him, demonstrating that he did not teach heresy. Maximus the Confessor also demonstrated that he did not teach heresy. However, unfortunately, none of this was considered at the Sixth Ecumenical Council. So the Sixth Ecumenical Council anathematizes Pope Honorius and does label him a heretic. Calls him a heretic and anathematizes him, along with others who really were heretics.
Theodore Mopsuestia, we agree there.
So I mean, he's in a list of people who actually were guilty of monothelitism. So what do we do with that? Well, there's two things. Number one, it has been pointed out that an ecumenical council is only infallible in matters of faith and morals, not in matters of fact. And they didn't even consider factually some of the counter evidence to demonstrate that he wasn't a heretic. So they made a factual judgment about him as an individual way after his death, without really considering all the data. Could it have made a mistake here? Yes, because they're not making a mistake on a matter of faith or morals. They're right on matter of faith and morals. They're right in condemning monothelitism. They're right there. That's infallible. But are they infallible in their assessment of any individual? No, they're not, because that's not something that Christ has guaranteed they're infallible in. It's only in matters of faith and morals. It's not necessarily in matters of fact, unless that matter of fact is necessary to preserve in order to safeguard something that is divinely revealed by God. And this is not one of those things. I mean, if I can still maintain what Scripture teaches about the two wills of Jesus, whether Honorius existed or not, whether he was a heretic or not. So factually, whether he was a heretic or not is irrelevant to what Scripture teaches. So it's not one of those necessary things. So we couldn't even say it's a secondary object of infallibility. So in other words, this is outside of their scope of infallibility. This is not an object of infallibility. Maybe they have the authority to judge a person, but they don't have the authority to do so infallibly. So could they have made an error here? Possibly. Is it also the case that maybe they understood when they were condemning him as a heretic, they were condemning him as perhaps somebody who was privately a heretic and not somebody who actually publicly, as the Pope, as the universal shepherd, taught it? Some people might say that you're reading too much into it. Maybe not. Certainly some of the people that were condemned there were publicly teaching heresy in their teaching office. But could they have understood at least Honorius to have been just like a private heretic who maintained this in some of his epistolary exchanges, but did not impose this on the universal church, like in his magisterium as the universal shepherd? Maybe, but again, that might be reading a little bit too much into it. But again, there's that alternative that it could be that they're just factually mistaken. But it's certainly the case that he did not teach this like ex cathedra in a way that would violate Vatican I. Like that's certainly the case. You could understand, even if you want to say that the Sixth Ecumenical Council was right in condemning him as a heretic, and he was a heretic, he wasn't teaching this definitively as the universal shepherd. I don't even think that he was teaching this as the universal shepherd. I just think he was giving his understanding as a patriarch, but I don't think that he was teaching this as the universal shepherd of all Christendom, and then teaching it in a definitive way. So,
yeah, those are really good points there. Another thing that I'd like to add, you bring up, I think, the most important point that I think people tend to overlook. And the reason they tend to overlook it, I don't think they've actually read the letters of Honorius. I don't think he was teaching heresy. I don't. And I know people are going to come back and they're going to say, what are you talking about? He said one will. Well, look at the context. Look at the defenses of Honorius that have been put out there, which, by the way, St. Maximus the Confessor offers up a fantastic one as well. I think that that's an important thing. I'd also recommend people look at what Bellarmine has to say in the great St. Alphonsus Liguori. They have incredible commentary on this as well. That's important. And the other part that people tend to not, and this is where I get very confused, Michael, where I get confused is there are, and I want to be fair to our Eastern brothers and sisters, you probably find Catholics as well, that think every jot and tittle of an ecumenical council is infallible. That to me is quite problematic. If you're going to take the position that every jot and tittle, everything, then where do you draw the line? You're going to draw the line. Is the acta also infallible? You see where I'm going. You run into a lot of problems when you go down that kind of a road.
Yeah,
it leads to a lot of issues.
Some take that position of conciliar fundamentalism, that everything that it asserts is actually infallible, and I think that that's absurd, because it is the case that you can point to some factual mistakes on part of some of the ecumenical councils. They'll cite one person as someone when in fact it was somebody else. So yeah, I don't think that that's sustainable. And if you have that level of infallibility for an ecumenical council, you're going to pretty quickly lose confidence in the magisterium when you're confronted with those factual miscitations of the ecumenical councils. So I think that that's a position that is, number one, just unreasonable, and number two, sets people up for failure. So obviously, I think that it's appropriate for the Catholic Church to limit things to faith and morals. But I recognize that there's some Orthodox who kind of take that conciliar fundamentalist view and say, no, literally everything, even the factual issues, are infallible. And I've even heard an Orthodox priest say that they're inspired, like on the level of sacred scripture inspiration. God inspires, God breathes scripture. He does the same thing for councils. He breathes those out like it's divine revelation. So in other words, post-apostolic revelation is on par with apostolic revelation. I've seen that as well.
I have. Yeah, I've seen that as well. Run into all kinds of quackery. Michael, I think that those that attempt to argue, because you will find it, they will argue that Honorius pretty much invalidated papal infallibility, that he they will then utilize language and say that, well, he attempted to teach this from his teaching office. I think the big problem there is that we all hold to multiple early ecumenical councils. And when you realize and you look at the words of Pope Agatho, you look at many other declarations as well, you have certain words that you run into. For instance, I believe this is from the Sixth Ecumenical Council, where we read, talking about Rome, it says, for he received from the Redeemer of all himself by 3 commendations, the duty of feeding the spiritual sheep of the church, under whose protecting shield this apostolic church of his has never turned away from the path of truth in any direction of error. I mean, and it goes forward, whose authority as that of the prince of all the apostles, the whole Catholic Church and the ecumenical synods have faithfully embraced. That kind of language is quite powerful, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, it seems like, so Agatha's epistle to the emperor, it seems like it teaches papal infallibility, and the bishops at the Sixth Ecumenical Council clearly assent to it. So what do we do then when several sessions later they're condemning Honorius as a heretic? The reason why I made that distinction earlier, maybe they were suggesting that he was a heretic in a degree lower than his universal capacity, is because of that. I don't know how else to reconcile the fact that the conciliar fathers conceded papal infallibility for the teaching office of the Pope, and then they condemn the Pope, Pope Honorius, as a heretic. The only way I can really reconcile that is to say that what they were condemning him as, not some of the other individuals, but they were condemning him as a heretic as far as his private person, or at least as far as some lower grade, like not as his universal teaching office as the Bishop of Rome, but as some kind of lower form of that. Maybe that's the distinction they had in mind. I know that's reading a little bit into it, but I kind of have to, am forced to do that in order to reconcile them. Maybe they understood the Church of Rome being unblemished to refer only to the universal teachings of the Roman pontiff, but not necessarily things that is a degree lower than that. So maybe they had that distinction in mind, but does it invalidate Vatican I? No, because Vatican I's criteria is threefold. Number one, he has to teach on matter of faith and morals. Number two, he has to define something. And then number three, he has to do so as the universal shepherd. And he doesn't define anything here. He doesn't make a definitive solemn judgment. So, and I would question whether or not he's actually acting as the universal pastor here, or if he's acting in a lower grade. I would really question that. Maybe somebody can say that, no, he's acting as the universal shepherd here. Well, even if you can demonstrate that, well, okay, you got that. And you say it's on faith and morals. Yep, it is on faith and morals, but did he define it? That was the third criteria, not necessarily something that he proposes or even teaches, but did he define it? And I want to say, no, he didn't do any of the above.
I agree with you. Now, Michael, one thing that I've got to pick your brain on this. I have people that, like all of us, long and yearn for, God willing, in our lifetime, in my lifetime, that there'll be reunion. We all long for it. That would be such a beautiful and wonderful thing. And I've dialogued with some people where some people are much harder on that, and they'll say there's no way, not in our lifetime, not in my family tree's lifetime. But those that are a little bit softer, Michael, will then come forward and they'll say, okay, well, if there is reunion in the future, you guys are going to have to get rid of papal infallibility, or it's never going to happen. Let me ask you this, Michael. Is that possible? Would that ever occur if there would ever be any kind of reunion between East and West? Would we have to bend the knee and pretty much say, look, papal infallibility is out the window, or it doesn't apply to you? What do we do with that?
Yeah, I think it's unreasonable to say that the Catholics have to reject something that they've definitively taught in order to be reconciled with the Orthodox. I think that's just not going to happen. So I think that's unreasonable. And of course, the Church could not do that without then admitting that it is not what it claimed to be. It is not the Church that Christ established, at least fully, in its teaching office. It would basically shoot itself in the face if it ever did do such a thing. So I don't think that that's going to happen, and I think it's unreasonable for any Orthodox to say that, well, you have to repudiate Vatican I. I think the road moving forward is, how can we understand Vatican I in a way that's consistent with the tradition of the Eastern Orthodox? And I think that there is a way to understand it in a way that's consistent, and it's to point out that even here, the Orthodox have accepted in the 7 ecumenical councils the seeds of Vatican I. the seeds of this papal universal supremacy and also infallibility. They've accepted it in, for example, you mentioned the Sixth Ecumenical Council. So Agatha's epistle to the emperor, the seeds of Vatican I are there. So one is only requiring the Orthodox to accept their own tradition. Now the question is, okay, well, how does that tradition unfold and develop, and what are its implications in relation to Eastern churches? Those are questions that we can certainly have, but it needs to be in a way that's consistent, of course, with Vatican I. But Vatican I ecclesiology, again, is already there. It's native, I think, to the tradition of the Orthodox. So it's not asking the Orthodox to fundamentally change their own ecclesiology, because they don't actually have a settled ecclesiology anyway. So yeah, but again, I'll also want to emphasize the fact that Vatican I ecclesiology doesn't necessarily mean that the Pope has to be hands-on in absolutely everything, and he has to appoint every single bishop in the East, and that, you know, he has to be constantly in their affairs and constantly micromanaging. That's not what universal jurisdiction is really intended to be.
Vatican II very, very much was very clear that the Holy Father would definitely respect them and their traditions. But talking about the East and their traditions, in particular our Orthodox friends, I think that you really said it best, Michael, when you said all that we really want them to do is accept their own tradition.
Right.
Really, that is what it comes down to. You talked about how they essentially have accepted beforehand the seeds of Vatican I. I'm going to, you tell me what you think about it. I want to take it a little further and say, not only the seeds, but as those seeds began to flower as well, Chalcedon, Sixth Ecumenical Council, Seventh, to me it's very clear. And not only that, we call them, and we do it in all charity, calling them to return to the fullness of the faith, because to me it seems like it becomes a pattern when you lack this teaching authority that they lack. And we look at their great, for them, they're great patriarchal figures like Mark of Ephesus, Joseph Brienios, St. Gregory Palamas, who also held to the Immaculate Conception or the Immaculate Creation of Mary. Nowadays, a lot of them view that as being too Latin to accept. All we really want them to do is accept their pretty much the tradition of their own forefathers or patriarchal figures. And I think that's something fair, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that we have to call them to accept their own tradition. I want to say that instances where they're rejecting the filioque, instances where they're rejecting some other issues are not something definitive, because first of all, I don't think that the Orthodox can issue a definitive judgment after the loss of the emperor. So I don't think that there really is a definitive teaching organ for Orthodoxy, unless literally every single synod unanimously accepted something in the exact same way. And I don't know when that has ever happened. At least again after the time of the emperor. But if somebody could point me to it, I'd be happy to see that. So I don't even think that they have that universal teaching authority to teach definitively. And if that's the case, then there's always an opportunity for them to offer reform to their own perspective, or more recent perspective, and reform back to an older perspective that is in their tradition. So it wouldn't be unfair to ask them to maybe reverse some of the non-definitive teachings that some of their patriarchs have had on the filioque. It wouldn't be unfair for them to do that, because it was never a definitive thing, even though maybe some of them thought it was definitive. I want to say that there's no definitive universal teaching organ in Orthodoxy. So I think that they're able to make some changes here. And again, it's not a substantial change to their tradition. I want to say the filioque and the Immaculate Conception, that's part of your tradition. Even if you haven't necessarily teased out all of its implications, it's there in seed form in your own tradition.
It sure is. It most definitely is. Now, I want to say that I've been incredibly edified by this discussion with you, Michael. I gotta have to bring you on many more times. Before we do wrap up, I have been picking your brain this whole time. I wanted to ask you, is there any particular issue with the magisterium, not issue, anything about the magisterium or a reversal that you'd like to talk about before we wrap up here? Anything you might have in your mind that you might say, look, William, we didn't get to touch upon this, but this is fascinating to me.
Yeah, maybe the outside the church there is no salvation issue. This
Yeah.
comes up all the time with
Oh, yeah.
magisterial reversals. I don't think that there's a full reversal here. I
Mhm.
think that there's a reversal in some of the language that is used. I think there's a reversal in some of the emphasis,
Mhm.
and we might even say a reversal in some of the intentions of some of the conciliar fathers of
Yeah.
the past, but never anything that's like substantial. The teaching itself has been overturned. So, for example, if you look at maybe Unum Sanctum
Mhm.
or the Council of Florence, when it teaches what it does about um, outside the church, there is no salvation. So, Unum Sanctum, every creature has to be in submission to the Roman pontiff, or Florence, basically everybody, Jews, Greeks, pagans,
Yeah.
everyone, unless they enter into the church before death, they're damned. Okay, so how do we understand that maybe in light of Vatican II that talks about people uh, who are not formally a Catholic, but then it's possible that the Holy Spirit is working in them and even bringing them over to salvation. So perhaps the Eastern Orthodox.
Mhm.
How do we do that? How do we reconcile those things? Is there a reversal? I don't think so. I think that what is being emphasized previously is that there's no salvation outside the church. It's only in the church that there's salvation. Now the question is, and what we see by Vatican II is, it is possible to be in the church and saved in the church, the one true church, outside of which there is no salvation. It's possible to be in that church without being formally a member of the Catholic Church, without like formally being a card carrying Catholic. It's possible to be part of that one church and to be saved by it without formally being under
Yep.
certain conditions. And so that's the rub. And I think that shows that there's not really a substantial change here. Maybe there's change again in the language and emphasis, and maybe even the intention of some people at Florence maybe was that literally, unless you're a card carrying Catholic, you're damned. Maybe
Right.
that was some of their intentions, but that's not what's defined. Whatever's just an intention is not necessarily what's defined. It's the teaching itself. And the teaching itself still just indicates there's only salvation in the Catholic Church. And so, yes, Jews, pagans, Greeks, everybody else, you won't be saved unless you're joined to the church. But the question is, could they be joined to the church without being a formal member? And really, since the discovery of the New World,
Yeah.
our theologians and even popes had to really start working through the issue of invincible ignorance, and could somebody be part of the church interiorly without having been formally admitted into the Catholic Church. And the answer was yes, it's possible. And Vatican II just took those developments over the last 500 years and just put them into a magisterial document. So it was just already stuff that we were working on behind the scenes. And again, what it puts forward doesn't fully reverse anything in the past. They're actually reconcilable.
I agree 100%. They are definitely reconcilable. Michael, I've been incredibly edified by our time together this afternoon. I'd like to give you an opportunity. Put in a plug in anything you might be working on. I mean, people know exactly where to find you, but for some people that might not know where to find you, and shame on them if they don't know where, put a plug in for anything, brother. The floor is yours right now.
Well, of course, the website is reasonandtheology.com. The YouTube channel is just Reason and Theology. So if you just go to YouTube, type in Reason and Theology, it will come up. But also, I offer a course on the Magisterium that people might be interested in purchasing. It's at maximusinstitute.com, and it's called Understanding the Magisterium. So that's available. I also have extra Patreon content for patrons at patreon.com/Reason and Theology. So there's extra stuff there. And by the way, there's also free content on the Magisterium at Reason and Theology on my Magisterium playlist, available to everybody. So yeah, those are some resources to check out.
And a ton of material there that you can really check out. Great, top-notch, elite level material. I like to point people to material that I think is top-notch, will really edify them, not only inform them, but also edify them. And I really do point them towards that. By the time this does air, there will be links down there. People can click them. They can go to them. Definitely go over there and support everything Michael is doing. Michael and myself work together a lot. We're all very frequently busy a lot too, so we find ways to work with each other now, but we will continue to find ways working with each other. Michael, thank you so much for your time, brother. And I look forward to having you back on again. And I look forward to being back with you again as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael,
and
thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. God bless, brother.
You too.